Though Tostig was waiting for the red moon, its appearance was as magical as it was sudden. His eyes momentarily strayed from the night horizon, where all he could see were distant stars. The rising moon had changed all that in an instant. Its orange-red glow dressed it in a startling and terrifying gown of mystery. He had witnessed this event in the past, but never in a strange land, and never in the open. He awaited the appearance of a vein of some magical mineral that ran through the center of the stone map. It joined Tostig's current position with the location of the cave door. The mineral glowed green when it was subjected to a heat source, but only once. As it cooled, the mineral's glow faded. Beyond that, despite his certainty when speaking with Freydis and Gudrid, Tostig couldn't figure out how the red moon could open a cave entrance. Local natives had told him only that the red moon warned of death to those willing to defile a holy city, a city reserved solely for the gods the builders had worshipped. Tostig took this to mean that the red moon would grant access to that city. "Is it time?" Freydis asked. Tostig looked at the map. The stick's shadow was a hair's breadth away from the center of the arc. "It's now or never," he said. He took the torch from Yarlabank and pushed it against the rock map. Its flame flickered and jumped across the map's surface. When he removed the torch, the magical vein was there, glowing a dull, milky green. He looked at the lines that ran from the top to the bottom of the map and found the exact location of the cave door. It was concealed in a rock wall above the river. He looked up. The moon, if not now, would soon be in position. He led the others to the rocky riverbank, and they carefully stepped down onto a ledge only wide enough to accommodate their feet. With their stomachs pressed up against the wall, the river raging below them, and their only light the guttering torch held high in Tostig's hand, they carefully shuffled along the length of the ledge, hands pressed against the wall for balance. "Look!" Asgir yelled. Tostig followed his line of sight to the opposite side of the river, where the red moon was reflected off the rock's face. "This doesn't make sense," Tostig thought, looking at the reversed image of the moon. The moon map clearly positioned the door. Suddenly, the ground beneath him quaked and a part of the rock wall caved in. Opposite to what his senses were telling him and what was possible, Tostig and the others fell forward through a doorway that had opened in the rock face on their side of the river, directly opposite the reflection. "We only have hours at the most before we must leave," Tostig said, as they picked themselves up off the cave floor, "or we'll be sealed in here forever." "But the door is here on the cave floor. How can it close again?" Asgir asked, indicating the stone slab. "I don't know, but the warning was very clear. Do not be in the cave once the red moon hides beneath the sky." "But how will we know in which direction to head?" Freydis said, looking around. "There," Yarlabank yelled, pointing at the red light of the moon, beaming into a rocky corridor where it struck a mirror-like mineral and focused into a thin band of refracted light. They followed the light to the next marker and the next, each marker leading them along a path of refracted moonlight, like a trail of breadcrumbs, and getting dimmer and dimmer the farther it was reflected into the tunnels. By the time the light had faded into nothing, they had no longer needed it. They stood at the top of a staircase. Tostig sniffed. The air held a familiar scent. He held his torch up toward the cave wall and saw a ledge with a trough chiseled into it. He followed it for as far as the torchlight allowed him to see. It looked like it encircled the entire chamber. He gently lowered his torch to the trough, and the flame jumped from his torch to the substance within, racing around the wall of the great chamber in a whoosh of air. The cavern glowed with amber warmth. They couldn't have imagined the sight that lay before their eyes. The beauty of 1,000 sunsets couldn't rival it. Their reflections stared back at them from glowing walls of gold, polished to such brilliant shine that the buildings appeared to contain a light source of their own. Protected from the elements above ground, there was nothing to tarnish their splendor and beauty. No one spoke. Not one person could take a full breath. For one eternal second, reality didn't exist. There was nothing real, no thoughts to be thought, only gold. It was as if the gold had siphoned their ability to think. Tostig's eyes filled with tears that he couldn't stop no matter how hard he tried. All of the stories of Valhalla and the afterlife didn't compare to the majestic glory of the rooftops. Gold after gold after gold. One room of these monolithic structures contained the wealth of kings. Tostig blinked. It was simply too big and too overwhelming to be real. I could never have imagined this, Freydis whispered. Are we dreaming? I think we are the dream, Asgir said, his voice drifting off to some unseen place. I wish Gudrid were here to see this. She is, a voice yelled from behind them. They turned to see two natives holding Gudrid by her arms. She looked exhausted, but unharmed. Ari stood in front of them. Gudrid, have they hurt you? Freydis yelled. Is the baby all right? The child will remain safe as long as you cooperate, Ari interrupted. It will join the rest of the order and be conditioned to lead. Gudrid had been silently praying. I can still feel the baby, she called to Freydis. Then, even though she was distraught, the beauty of the city drew her eyes away. She stared in wonder. You were right, she silently said. Torvald, my love, you were right. Then she swayed, caught herself as the earth shifted slightly. Behind Freydis, Tostig whispered, We are running out of time. What do you want from us, Ari? Freydis said. I just want you out of the way. With his words, an army of natives entered the chamber carrying large wicker baskets. Without hesitation, they bypassed the group and entered the city, scooping up anything of value and placing it in their baskets before moving on to the next item. They collected gold plates and gold pitchers, jewelry set with precious gemstones, faceted goblets and urns with intricate designs etched into their gold faces by expert craftsmen. There were helmets and bracers that glistened in the dim amber light, and statues that ranged in size from the length of an arm to life-size replicas gleaming on either side of building entrances. The army of natives carried away more than their weight in gold-filled baskets, never stopping and never faltering. A steady stream of natives filed in and out of the cavern, undaunted by the trembling of the ground. They filed past a building face the height and width of the cavern, blinded by the wealth they carried in their arms. Engraved on a plaque next to the door in an ancient and forgotten language was a warning to all those who sought out the beauty and the riches of the city. Do not be fooled by its brilliance, for the weight of a man's heart is worth 1,000 times its weight in riches. The ground spasmed again. Tostig, what is happening? Why is the ground shaking? Freydis whispered. Tostig dug the toe of his boot into the dirt floor of the cavern. I can't say for sure, Freydis, but the ground looks like it is made of clay. For some reason, it's shifting. What would make it do that? She asked nervously. I don't know. Maybe the supporting ground underneath is giving way, being eroded like a river eventually does to its banks. Water. That must be it, Tostig realized. Water from the river must have been diverted somehow, and it's flowing beneath us, carrying away the foundation of the cavern floor. We have to get out of here and quickly, Freydis said. She turned to her husband. Ari, your agreement with us was to share the gold, not to take it all for yourself. If you will not honor your agreement with Gudrid, then let us go. You have power, you have riches, you need nothing more. Freydis knew better. She was all too familiar with greed and its exacting toll on the soul. There was always room for more, or so the perpetrator reasoned. Ari was no exception to that rule. Just like all the others, he would crave more and more. There was no enough, because the more he acquired, the larger that dark hole grew inside of him. By all that is sacred, Freydis whispered, this is just like our marriage. The earth shifted again, but this time with a pronounced effect. One of the buildings at the other end of the cavern collapsed. Water bubbled up from the break in the ground, and the building disappeared into the dark and watery hole. A short native ran up to Ari. Abba, we are being attacked, he said urgently. These were the words that Gudrid had been waiting to hear. The words pressing on her ear had the sound of victory. Where is the rest of the camp? Ari asked, his expression desperate. They've been cut off. The river's flow has shifted. It's spilling over its banks and flooding the forest between here and the camp. Of course, Ari said. The moon has raised the level of the ocean tide, and it's raising the height of the river. He seemed to gain some satisfaction from figuring out what was happening, but Gudrid knew that Ari didn't suspect the full extent of what was happening. The gold and other riches in the cave had blinded him. Still, Gudrid could sense fear and desperation in Ari's tone when he asked, "Who is attacking us and how many are here?" "No more than 12, Abba. It is the others." There was a loud inhalation, and then Gudrid felt the grasp of the natives loosen on her arm. Ari is now showing his true colors, she thought. He is a coward. She considered escape, but worried about injuring her baby. Her eyes drifted to Asgir, who was staring at Ari in loathing, his rage growing visibly by the moment. Suddenly, in one movement partially concealed by the darkness of the cave, Asgir had his bow in his hand and an arrow out of his quiver. "Stop!" Gudrid yelled. Too late. Asgir's face registered surprise, as blood streamed from a stone dagger sticking out of the back of his neck. His knees buckled and his body sank to the ground, as if all the life was slowly being let out of it. Tostig's hand went for his sword. Gudrid whirled toward Ari. "Let them try to save him," she begged. "It's too late," Ari announced for all to hear, as if to prove his control over the situation. "The dagger's tip is poison. He will not survive." Gudrid hoped that he was lying, but that hope was slim. Asgir flopped forward onto the ground, his falling body taking her heart with it. Not only did she see a fallen man, but fallen kin. Gudrid worried that with Ingeborg and Asgir dead, their risk of failure tripled. She needed a solution, and she needed it immediately. Her typical strategy was violence and fighting her way out of a situation, but that would only get more people killed. She needed a non-violent solution. "Ari," a familiar voice yelled from the tunnel, "we need to call reinforcements or retreat." Gudrid turned to see Adam walking toward them. The black and white robe of the Chaldee had replaced his walnut-colored monk's robe. He held a lance similar to the ones that the Chaldee monks carried. "Adam, you snake," she hissed. "By all that is right, you will pay for your betrayal with your life." "Please, Gudrid, don't utter threats that you are not prepared to act upon," Adam replied with a superior sneer. "Your mission is a failure. Soon Thorfinn's plans for permanent settlement will be a distant memory, crushed by the death of his people and his wife, along with his unborn child." "No, Ari, this is too evil even for you," Freydis begged. "When death is no longer part of your life, killing becomes easy." Ari pulled a stone dagger from a sheath tied around the waist of one of his native guards. He raised his arms and punctured the skin of his wrist, then drew the dagger along his arm to his elbow. As the skin parted and blood flowed from the gash, the flesh bubbled and the opened skin rejoined. He replaced the knife and looked back to the group with satisfaction. "I cannot be destroyed," he yelled, raising his wrist high above his head and showing it to those present. The natives quickly bowed in reverence. "You are wrong," a voice answered from the dark. "For every state, there is an opposite and opposing one." The owner of the voice moved into the light. "Dionysius!" Ari gasped. "You died!" Dionysius raised his arm to show a healed wound. "No, you made sure I did not. By cutting me with the holy lance. By now you've witnessed its power." Dionysius raised his other hand, clutching a wad of pages. "But in the Book of Kells lies the secret to reverse its effects. You are not immortal, Ari. None of us are." In one swift and fluid motion, Adam lifted the lance he was carrying and thrust it into Ari's back. Unlike the demonstration with the dagger, this time he writhed in pain. A small spot of blood appeared on Ari's robes and grew larger and larger. His gasps became louder and louder as the pain gripped him and the air leaked from his lungs. Adam pulled the lance out, taking a piece of the blood-soaked robe with it. Ari crumbled to the ground. Dionysius strode forward and stood over him. "The lance can also take away what it gives. You are not meant to have eternal life. No one is." He grabbed the tip of the lance that Adam held and scratched his hand with it, drawing blood. "Not even me." The cavern shook with a tremor so violent it ripped a boulder-sized section from the roof. The rock crashed through the cavern floor, leaving a gaping chasm. Water bubbled up, creeping toward the tunnel where the monks and Gudrid's group were gathered. The natives dropped the gold they were carrying and ran to the cavern entrance. Some fell through cracks in the ground that opened beneath their feet. Others were pinned by the rocks falling from the roof. Gudrid's captives let her go and ran for their lives. Freydis and the others ran up to Gudrid. Adam joined them, and they too headed out of the cavern. "Adam," Dionysius shouted, "throw the lance into the cave. No one should possess it." Adam stopped and snapped off the wooden shaft. He looked at the spearhead in his hand, as if tempted to disregard Dionysius and keep it. Then he threw back his arm and threw the spearhead into the chamber, to be buried with the rest of the subterranean city. They turned and ran. One by one they stepped out into the crumbling ledge, their only means of escape to the solid ground of the forest above. The rushing river roared below them, hollowing out the rock face and pulling out dirt. Large boulders splashed down into the rushing river to be instantly consumed by the rapids below. Soon the ledge would be impassable. A broad section of the ledge fell away. They were trapped. "What are we to do?" Tostig yelled. "We'll be swept away by the river if we stay here." Gudrid looked down at the river. Falling in would mean certain death. Even if they survived the fall from the crumbling ledge, they could very well be dashed against boulders or crushed by boulders falling on top of them. "I am so glad to see you are still one of us, Adam of Bremen," Gudrid yelled. "I will go to my death knowing that one day I will see you in Valhalla." "Or heaven," Adam smiled, "but it will not happen today." 6 ropes dropped from the cliff above. Whether they came down from Valhalla, heaven, or the forest above was not important. The only important thing was that each one of them grabbed onto a rope and held on tight. One by one they were pulled from the disintegrating ledge and the rushing river to the safety of the mossy ground above. "This is Talarictuk," Dionysius said when he'd been pulled up and helped to his feet by a squat native with a round face. He slapped the man's shoulders and smiled his gratitude, then looked at Gudrid and the others and warned, "We're still not safe. The network of caves beneath our feet is collapsing." They ran through the forest without looking back or thinking. They ran on instinct over ground that shuddered and quaked as it collapsed all around them, sometimes buckling under their feet, like a thin layer of ice on a frozen lake. Gudrid couldn't describe the sensation. It didn't split so much as give way. Then she was pitching forward, falling toward a gap widening before her. The root system of a nearby tree broke her fall. She fell hard, but not hard enough to hurt herself. She gasped her relief, clutching her root, then opened her mouth in silent horror as the roots also began to sink. "Gudrid!" Snorri, the closest to Gudrid, yelled, leaping toward her. He fell short and could only watch helplessly as she fell through the forest floor. The others, alerted by Snorri's shout, stopped and turned back. The roots supporting Gudrid cracked and groaned above, to give way at any moment. She tried to find a firmer purchase, but her questing fingers slipped over the wet and slimy surface. Snorri reached down into the hole and grabbed Gudrid's wrist. "Don't let go of me," she screamed. "I won't, but you will have to help me pull you up," he said. "Can you give me your other hand?" The others arrived to help. Riverbank and Tostig held onto Snorri's body, and Freydis reached into the hole to grab Gudrid's other wrist. Below her dangling feet the ground crumbled away as water bubbled through growing gaps, then heaved and disappeared into the rushing underground river. "Oh no!" Gudrid yelled, looking over her left shoulder. "Gudrid, what is it?" Freydis screamed. "Let go of me." "What? No! Let go of my wrists." Gudrid managed to wrestle free of Freydis' grip, but Snorri hung on, the strength of his grip cutting off her circulation. "Gudrid, we're trying to save your life. What are you doing?" he pleaded. "Please, Snorri, trust me." Her tone was frantic. "I know what I'm doing." Snorri looked at Freydis in disbelief. "If you don't drop me, I will be killed," Gudrid begged. Snorri, without another thought, released her. Snorri watched helplessly as Gudrid splashed into the black water below. Seconds later, a wave of incredible force and height moved past the hole, followed by a smaller surge that heaved over the edges of the hole, then subsided. Snorri jumped up and took off his weapons and shed any clothing that would slow a swimmer down, then jumped into the hole. Black, murky water and silence engulfed him. The frigid water numbed his fingers, and within moments, the slightest rubbing of his clothing stung his skin. His mind focused on one goal: find Gudrid. What a loss to the future of his people if he failed, Snorri thought. But where to look? If Gudrid were anywhere, she would be as deep as possible to avoid the surface current, in a place where she wouldn't be dragged away from the hole. Once the wave passed, the water should rise high enough for them to reach the hole and return to solid ground. Silently congratulating Gudrid for her ingenuity, Snorri kicked wildly, pushing himself deeper and deeper into the water. There was only one problem with this plan. There was no guarantee that they would find the hole again. He glanced upward. The setting red moon provided a surrealistic doorway through the murky water. He relaxed, but only for a moment, as he felt the tug of the current. Finding the hole might not be the problem. Keeping themselves from being swept away from it would be. Once they surfaced, they'd have to use the underside of the rock ground to stabilize themselves and keep them from being swept away by the rushing river. On the surface, the others watched the hole for any signs of Gudrid or Snorri, hoping that their wait didn't turn into a vigil for their two companions. One of the natives approached with a torch. Freydis grabbed the light and leaned over the hole, hoping to see movement under the water or to provide a beacon for their friends to follow back to safety. She saw nothing. She was about to lose her sister and friend, Freydis thought. She knew that the more time that passed, the closer Gudrid would come to death, and the next thought was too horrific to think of, even with her warrior mentality, the death of her unborn child. In desperation, Freydis reached into the hole and waved her arm back and forth in the water. She touched something, a garment, then flesh, an arm. Wrapping her fingers around the limb, she reached in with her other hand, risking being pulled in. Seeing this, Jarlebank grabbed her legs, anchoring her. Heaving with all her strength, Freydis pulled. A hand broke the surface of the water. "Help me!" she yelled. The others reached in and grabbed whatever their hands encountered. Snorri surfaced, still breathing, but nearly unconscious. His long ginger curls were plastered around his face. Even with everyone's help, Snorri was heavy. They heaved again. "Gudrid," he whispered. Freydis let go of his arm and reached beneath the water once again. She followed Snorri's arm to another wrist, held tight in his grasp. "Gudrid," she thought, and pulled. As the others dragged Snorri away from the opening, Dionysius plunged his arms into the water beside Freydis's and wrapped them around Gudrid's chest, lifting her by her armpits. The gathered natives reached out as she burst from the water and swung her legs around onto the ground. "Gently," Freydis urged. "She is with child." They placed her on a soft bed of moss near Snorri. No one moved for several moments. They stood over her and stared, saying nothing. Her shallow breaths were almost unnoticeable. Her body was in shock, but she was alive. She sputtered, then coughed up water in heaving gouts, inhaling loudly before releasing another loud explosion of saliva and water. Freydis helped her sit up. Gudrid's head flopped forward. Her eyes slowly opened, and she looked around at their faces, half concealed by the night and shadows. She smiled, then her smile faltered. "Snorri," she whispered. "Snorri saved me." "Yes, Gudrid, he is right here," Freydis whispered in her ear. Gudrid looked around and saw Snorri lying several feet from her. His matted hair stuck to his face. He was looking at her. When he met her gaze, he slowly moved, trying to rise up on one elbow, but he collapsed back onto the ground. With Freydis's help, Gudrid managed to pull herself closer to Snorri. "My friend," she said, hoping he could hear her. "I knew that my child's name would be Snorri, and now I know why." Snorri's mouth managed to curve in a smile, and his breathing calmed. "We're still not safe," Dionysius said. As if the ground had heard his warning, and another quake shook them to their feet. Gudrid staggered over the mossy ground, hoping that her next step would not be the one that plunged her back into the subterranean river. Once they were a safe distance from the destruction, the group paused and looked back. The ground had an almost fluid quality to it, shifting and bending like the world serpent's back. Rocks millions of years old rose and slowly sank back into the ground as the surface collapsed. The forest exploded in ear-shattering geysers of rocks, water, and plants. The heaving ground was like a giant's chest rising and then exhaling with an inhuman roar, sending rock and plumes of water high into the air. The cliff over the river was unrecognizable, permanently altered by the quaking and shuddering. Without a substrata to support the ground, what the raging river did not take, the earth swallowed whole. "The treasure is lost forever," Gudrid said. "Perhaps, but I think it's still there." Somewhere, Snorri replied. My people, Talarichtuk said, on Vinland will attack your people. How do you know this? Gudrid asked, thinking of Thorfinn. We've watched your people's coming and goings for many years now, on Vinland and here on Markland. Your presence is a threat to our way of life, to both the Chaldees and the people of this land. He's telling the truth, Freda said. But the Chaldee presence is a threat to your people as well, Tostig said. Yes, but while you threaten to conquer, as it may look on the surface, the fathers of the Lord's people and this land's people coexist. We accept each other and live harmoniously. We've left the basis part of our religion behind. There are new rules here. To survive, our way of life must change. Adam looked surprised. I wasn't expecting this admission, he admitted when Gudrid gave him a quizzical look. But I am not surprised that it would come to this. In a land where the Irish monks were so hopelessly outnumbered, they were not in the position to force their beliefs onto a larger and unwilling body. And from what I know of the Chaldees, why would they? Dionysius nodded. The act of suffering defines and exemplifies our love for our doctrine. A display of force would permanently change that delicate relationship and irreparably destroy any hope of redemption. He rested a hand on the squat native's shoulder. Talarichtuk's people are leading the attack against your people. We were under the impression that your intent was conquest, and that an attack was our only option, rather than risk more of your people landing on Vinland and overrunning the natives of this land. Is it too late to stop the attack? Gudrid said. It may be possible, Talarichtuk said, though he sounded uncertain. Once warriors have risen to madness, it is difficult to break off the attack. We have to try. Our people will not survive. There are too many of you, Gudrid said. Yes, you are correct, Talarichtuk agreed. But it was not us who started this. We are concerned only with our people and protecting our lands. You think that we look on you as gods. We do not. We have our own gods. We know that you are flesh and blood like us. For the first time in all the years she had traveled back and forth to Vinland and Markland, Gudrid knew that Talarichtuk was right. Her people were the strangers, and they had taken it upon themselves to pursue this course without regard for the peoples affected. The natives extended their hospitality as far as their code of ethics allowed, but once crossed it was difficult to reignite their trust. Now she understood Thorfinn's principle, to peacefully coexist with the natives. Coexistence secured the future of both peoples. There had been too much conquest and destruction for too long. That destruction needed to be performed in a framework of creation as well. In nature, destruction and creation existed in a union, where destruction created abundance. This lesson was all around them, Gudrid realized, but in the midst of human events it was ignored, or mistaken for weakness. Just as the natives were often seen as an inferior people that needed to be tamed, conquered, shaped into something useful. Thorfinn was right, she thought. As the land thrived, so did the people inhabiting it. It will be us who will end this, Talarichtuk added. He headed for the river. The others closely followed. Adam scrambled in behind Gudrid as the natives launched their boats into the river. Talarichtuk and Jarlabank also climbed into their boat and grabbed paddles. Gudrid, it was never my intention to betray you or the group, Adam said, as Talarichtuk and Jarlabank began paddling the boat downriver. Yes, I know. I had ventured upon Dionysius, a monk from Helluland, who took me Talarichtuk and his people, and the few Chaldees who were against Ari and his plan for domination of this land. I originally thought that I was walking into Ari's camp. Adam's voice dropped. I learned that Ari's plans of domination extended as far as our homeland, and possibly the known world. Gudrid watched Talarichtuk expertly move his paddle in and out of the water. Dionysius told me of Ari's power-hungry plan to take control of the Chaldees. When some revolted, they were banned from the group, and he ordered the allied natives to hunt them down and kill them. But Ari underestimated the love that their cohabitants had for the Chaldees. They joined the rebel monks and formed an opposing force that planned to one day fight Ari and destroy him. Until we came along, Gudrid said. Yes. When they saw us, they realized that I would be the perfect one to infiltrate the Chaldee camp and find the Book of Kells and the Holy Lance. I was unknown to Ari and the rest of the Chaldees. Together we devised a plan to infiltrate Ari's camp, gain his trust, and set the stage for an attack. We knew that the final battle would not be in the woods of Markland, but under the forest in the treasure cave. There Ari would be at his most vulnerable. Gudrid could see the wisdom of the plan. Ari would be drawn to the treasure, and his greed for the gold would blind him to all else. His only known adversary would be their group of 6 people, hardly a threat to him. And with Adam seemingly on his side, his authority would be all the more substantial. His overconfidence was his downfall, Gudrid said. I see how, Dionysius, and you used it to your advantage. They'd reached the mouth of the river. Talaric didn't show any signs of tiring. He kept up the same pace as he paddled over the ocean waves. Talaric listened to the 2 Europeans talking as he moved the boat through the water. In the 20 years he had been on Markland, he had become much more knowledgeable in their ways. In his mind they transformed from gods to friends, as was the case with Dionysius and hated enemies like Ari. Ari, whose machinations split the tribes into 2 opposing fractions. He didn't want to make it generally known among the immediate group, but he feared that those wanting vengeance for the death of Ari might soon join the battle they were speeding to stop. He needed to end the fighting before it escalated into something that would kill most of the tribes of these lands. He didn't care about the Norse. In fact, any alliance with them was convenient for the moment, but would eventually live out its usefulness. Ahead of them in the open water, Gudrid saw a flotilla of small boats waiting for their group to join them. It appeared that Dionysius and Talaric were not taking any chances. They made sure reinforcements stood ready to assist their lead party if needed. The mass of boats parted and allowed Dionysius's and Talaric's boat to glide past them to take the lead. Then the natives took up their paddles and began struggling against the strong ocean current. The group slowly shaped itself into a triangular formation, just like flying geese. Those in the rearmost boats had the important job of keeping a watchful eye on the rear in case they were attacked from behind. Gudrid focused on the distant line of land ahead, washed by glowing sunlight under a white dotted sky. Thorfinn is under that same beautiful sky, she thought, fighting for life and glory, and fighting for a child that he does not yet know exists. She feared her world changing. For the first time in her life she feared the absence of the world that she knew, and most of all she feared for the life of her 3rd husband and the future of herself and her unborn son within her. She had survived the previous losses, but she didn't know if she could or wanted to try to endure another loss in her life. Our son, she thought. She allowed her emotions to absorb that word. She knew that the human being growing inside of her would be a boy, her son. Her visions were very clear. She saw the face and the blonde hair of the child as if she could reach out and stroke it. She knew that it was her son. She smiled and for a second was able to forget that on the other side of this body of water, her Thorfinn was fighting for his life and for the lives of his people and their future. How long will it take us to get back to Vinland? Gudrid asked. Hard to say, but we will be there soon. Hard to say, but we will be there soon. The ocean is pushing us farther and farther down the coast, Talaric answered. Gudrid paused, afraid to ask her second question. She pushed her fears aside and asked anyway. Will we get back to Vinland in time? I mean, in time to stop the attack by your people? Talaric did not have to answer. His look spoke to her. Anything he said would only be verbal confirmation of the truth, nothing more. It is too late. I know my people have already attacked. It was not the answer that she wanted to hear. Always in the human mind, there is some hope drifting below the surface of consciousness that things are different than how our fears shape them to be. But she knew that Talaric spoke the truth. Live in the present, she told herself. She knew that Thorfinn wanted to believe in the past and to allow that to dictate his future. Whether it was the immediate or the long-term future, Gudrid allowed the past to influence her, but never to dictate the present or replace the future. The future would come, whether she feared it or not, so why not look at it as positive and at present events as how things should unfold? Her ability to see was a gift that allowed her to accept the future. She wished that all of her people could have the same sight. They'd discover that what they really feared was the fear of not knowing rather than what may or may not happen. Destiny was the means to the end, not the end itself. The shoreline slowly grew, from a vista that was easily managed by the human eye to one overfilling the human senses. Moving dots littered the surface of the land like ants moving grains of sand. She instinctively extended her hand to clasp Freydis's, then remembered that her sister was in the other canoe. With no one to comfort her, she relied on herself and her sight for comfort. Her ability to see had always allowed Gudrid to avert danger and harm before it affected her or those closest to her. She needed to reaffirm her abilities and, most importantly, reaffirm her faith in those abilities. Thorfinn will be fine, she thought. He has good and loyal people with him. They will fight to the death protecting his dream and the dream of a new land for our people. Thorfinn had the superior firepower, weapons of metal crafted to fight men with armor-protected chests. His men were skilled warriors who had trained for years and fought many times. They were more than capable of protecting themselves from any aggressor. But the reality of the situation between the Norse and the natives was that it was like a pack of wolves attacking a bear. For all the skill and firepower of the Norse, they lacked the intimate harmony of the natives. They were much more communal than her kin was. Neither economics nor status separated these people from each other. There were neither slaves nor masters, merchants or landowners. All were connected on a fundamental level. She understood because she too was connected on this same level. But unlike her people, the natives formed a network of intuitive connections. They reached the rocky shoreline. In the not too far off distance, she heard the cries of battle, the sound of metal shattering thin spears into splinters. A Norseman of indomitable stature and strength wrestled with 3 native attackers, one on his back and 2 others attacking from the front, jabbing at him with stone daggers. Although their stone blades did not penetrate too far into him, trickles of blood coalesced to run down the back of his neck in a wide swath, and down his forehead into his eyes. The wolves' teeth bit many times into their enemy. His attackers were intentionally weakening the Norseman, similar to riding a buffalo and striking it repeatedly until they could easily strike the finishing blow. On a larger scale, this was the strategy of the entire native army, to weaken the Norse and then conquer them or chase them off. All were expendable for this common goal. Another Norseman watched as his kin fell under the natives' onslaught, their struggling bodies disappearing in the tall grass of the meadow. He took some comfort from knowing that his final resting place would be among those long blades of trampled and battle-worn meadow grass. His quiver had emptied out quickly. There were so many natives that he couldn't miss, no matter how badly he aimed. They didn't employ any means of protection, shield or otherwise, and so he had a 50-50 chance of inflicting either a superficial or lethal wound. They were killing and being killed for trees. He couldn't believe it. Trees. Gold and other precious metals were worth killing for, but trees were just trees. 2 natives ran toward him with their spears raised, ready to attack. Their eyes pierced into his soul, ripping through his flesh as if they could reach in and tear it out of his chest. He absent-mindedly reached into his quiver. Empty. He pulled out his sword, ready to strike. His body leaned to the right, partly deliberate, partly an unconscious reaction. He simultaneously swung his weapon. The point cut a bloody line across the throat of the first native and lopped the head off of the second one. Blood spurted from a severed artery as the headless corpse toppled at his feet, spraying blood over his legs and shoes. The other one had enough life left in him to hurl his spear point blank. The Norseman reached for the shield at his side. Too late. The spear pierced his leather armor and lodged between his ribs. With his waning strength, he thrust his sword into the native's stomach, then pulled it out. In the corner of his eye, he saw another native attempting to sneak up on him. Using the momentum created in pulling his sword from the fallen native, he swung the edge of the sword into this new foe. He looked down at the spearhead lodged in his ribcage. Blood stained its base and soaked his tunic. He pressed his hand against the wound, managing to slow the blood flow only a little. Desperately, he looked around for help from one of his kin. No one was near. They were all busy defending their own lives. The final blow had been struck. He fell to his knees, and his attackers swarmed over him, thrusting their daggers in and pulling them out, ripping out the last of his life.